Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the 250 events in the life of Jesus. We're doing this chronologically. We're going through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and we're looking at the life of Jesus as it happened, story to story. And we have about 250 of these stories that we look at, depending on how you break it up. And so today we're looking at Jesus sending a demon out of a little girl. And what has happened is, he has Jesus left Galilee, went to the northern region of Tyre and Sidon, and this is a Gentile area. And says while he's up there, this Gentile woman who lived there came to him and said, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David." So she uses the right terminology of who he is. For my father is possessed, or I'm sorry, my daughter is possessed by a demon that torments her severely. And Jesus just ignored her. He gave her no reply, not even a word. And his disciples urged him to send her away. And they're like, tell her to go away, right? They said, she is bothering us with all her begging. And Jesus said to the woman, I was sent only to help God's lost sheep, the people of Israel. But she came and worshiped him, pleading again, Lord, help me. Jesus responded, it isn't right. And pay attention to this because this is harsh. It isn't right to take food from the children and throw it to the dogs. She replied, that's true, Lord, but even dogs are allowed to eat the scraps that fall beneath the master's table. And then I love this where he's in verse 28, what he says here. He says, dear woman, Jesus, Jesus said to her, your faith is great. Your request is granted. And their daughter was instantly healed. And so this is, I love this story. I love all, these types of stories because I think they hit into you know, they go against a lot of our reactions and how we are to people sometimes. And so I think that's why we see these stories because, Jesus ignored her. He didn't, and he said some harsh things to her. He wasn't doing it to be mean, and we're going to look at that. But she continued. But even his apostles were like, they didn't have a heart. They just like, send her away. And so we if you go back to verse 23, like puzzled by Jesus, because, this is the first time we record that someone came to Jesus for help and he just ignores them, right? And it's like right there in front of him. And, you know, that it was, they probably puzzled the apostles. And so they were like, asked us, get rid of her, send her away. She's bothering them, right? Her constant begging is bothering us. They didn't show compassion, right? Or sensitivity for her needs. And we need to make sure we don't do this. We need to make sure that we show sensitivity and compassion to the needs of people, especially non Christians. It is possible, right, to become so occupied with spiritual matters and actually non-spiritual matters. I'll put that right. A lot of times we become so caught up in non-spiritual things, a lot of it physical things inside, around the church and stuff like that, and around Christianity, or even in our own lives, that we forget to focus on the needs of those around us. And we can do that with the spiritual too, right? We can get so focused on trying to be spiritual that we forget the actual spiritual needs and the physical needs we need to be, supplying to people. And so the other thing where area where this could be true is if we are prejudiced against needy people, right? Or we're prejudiced or racist, right? Like people are like, oh, there's not racism in the church. You know what the most segregated Sunday or most segregated time is in the United States? Sunday morning worship service, most segregated time in the United States. And so again, I'm not. There's a deeper thing we can look at in there and stuff like that. But I'm not saying that if you attend an all white church or you attend an all black church that necessarily there's racism there. But it's and I understand there's some complicated backgrounds as to why we are like that. But the church shouldn't be that way, right? The church should be the least segregated. I mean, you look at the way it was back then. So, we have to make sure we don't get caught up in that kind of stuff and do that. So instead of being annoyed or instead of being prejudiced towards someone because maybe they're a particular way, or instead of being racist someone because they're a certain skin color or they come from a different background or different nationality, we need to be aware of the opportunities that surround us, right? And we need to make sure that we look for every effort, no matter who it is, to be able to minister to someone. And so we make sure we don't get the attitude that we see the apostles and the disciples get here. It's like, hey, this person is bugging us with their begging, send them away. Right? That's not what we should do. We see in verse 24 when Jesus responds to her, he says that he was sent to help God's lost people, the people of Israel, which is true. Right? There's nothing false in this statement. This is true. he was sent there first. And we can I listed several verses where you can go back and look at that. But the main thing here is that, when Jesus said these words, he was in Gentile territory on a mission to Gentile people. So obviously his message was going to go out to the Gentiles, but he was using this as a teaching example and a learning example, and I think maybe testing her faith a little bit. So he ministered to the Gentiles, and on many other occasions also. We will see that. But he was just simply letting this woman know that the Jews were the first to have the opportunity to accept him as the Messiah, right? Before, because God wanted them. God wanted them to be the ones presenting the message to the rest of the world. He wanted the Jewish people to be the ones that were spreading the. So he wasn't rejecting this woman, right? This Gentile woman. I think, and this is, again, we don't 100% know what he was thinking or what he was doing here, but it does look like one, he was testing her faith, because anyone could come up and ask for something. He seems to be testing her faith, or he may have just wanted to have, to use this situation as another opportunity to teach that faith is available to all people. And maybe he was doing that there too. So we get into Matthew 15 verses 26 through 28. And this is harsh, right? This is really hard because basically Jesus literally, he calls her a dog, or implies that she's a dog. Now, I don't think Jesus is literally thinking or saying that she's a dog. I think he's using the Jewish language, what Jews would call Gentiles. Basically, they considered them dogs. Actually, they considered them below dogs, less than dogs. And so when he's saying this, when he says it isn't right to take food from the children and throw it to the dogs, I think he's kind of in a way mocking what the Jews say, or bringing to light what the Jews say, and putting that to her, and to see how her reaction would be as well. And so, like I said, dogs, this was a term Jews commonly applied to Gentiles because the Jews considered them no more than dogs, like I've talked about. So we look at that. Jesus, again, like I said, wasn't degrading the woman. He by using this term, he was reflecting, again, the Jewish attitude. And the woman doesn't argue. Right now, like, there's many a times where and I think rightfully so, if I'm being honest, that if you use this language, if I implied to a woman that she was a dog, right, and she was coming to me and asking me for help, she would be offended and leave, right? But she doesn't do that. She agrees. She's like, right? She agreed to be considered a dog as long as she could receive God's blessing for her daughter. And so again, this is why I lean toward the idea that this was a test of her faith, right? And to use it as a teaching example that the message for Jesus is everyone. And so what's ironic in this situation, right? He says, that verse 28, he says, "Dear woman," right? "Your faith is great." I love how he says, "Dear woman," right? There's compassion. There's just that love behind that when he says that. And so he lets her know her faith is great and that her request is granted. And so the ironic thing here is, many Jews would lose God's blessing and salvation because they would reject him, right? And then we had the flip side where many Gentiles would find salvation because they did recognize and accept him. So it's just, I love seeing these stories, these interactions. You got to dig a little bit deeper, because someone reading this for the first time might think, man, Jesus was really harsh to this woman. He was really mean to her, right? I mean, called her a dog, told her that, basically she wasn't worth the time of what he was doing, even though he was there ministering to. But again, I think he was using this as a teaching situation, a learning situation for us, because we get so caught up sometimes in thinking very self-righteous attitudes of thinking we are better than other people because, well, we're Christians, we're saved, and you're out there, you're just a mess. And we try to put this attitude, or this holier than thou type attitude and facade off, an image off of how we have it all together. When we know we don't, right? We know we don't. As Christians, if you're being honest with yourself, we're just as much of a mess as the rest of the world, right? Now, we may not sin as much, right? We may be trying to get ourselves together a little bit better, but the only difference between us and the world is that we have Jesus. We've accepted Jesus as our Savior. That's the only difference. So it doesn't make us any better than anyone else. It's Jesus who's the person that's awesome, that's great here. It's not us, right? And so we need to make sure that we keep that level that humble attitude. Let me say that humble attitude, and not get in there and thinking, oh, well, we're better than everyone else because we don't do this or we don't do that. You do. You sin, right? You sin. I mean, you may not have a particular type of sin that you're calling out that day, but you do. And so, we need to make sure that we are the people that we're supposed to be, and that we don't get caught up in this prejudice attitudes, right? Racist attitudes toward people, because that's not what we're called to be, right? And it can be hard sometimes, right? It can be hard sometimes because someone who grew up in the church, there were constantly people begging for money and for stuff, and there were constantly people trying to take advantage of us as a church. And so it was easy to get a hateful attitude right behind that, like just send them away, they're just you know and it was easy to judge. I remember there were times where we'd have someone. I remember sometime one lady pulled up in a Jaguar, and the first thing I think I said was, "This woman doesn't need any food," because she was coming to get food or clothing. I can't remember, what was one of the two. And so we don't know her situation. We don't know what happened, right? Maybe she had a good job that allowed her to afford a Jaguar, and she lost her job and she lost everything. That's the only thing she had to drive around in. I mean, we don't know situations, and so we would judge based just on that. And so we need to make sure that we don't do those type of things, and that we have the attitude that Jesus had here. Now, I obviously don't apply Jesus's method of learning here. Let's go to the end. That's not for us. We're not in the. We don't know the hearts and added minds of everyone, and so it would not be best to call someone a dog when they're coming asking for food. But the compassion at the end that we see, right? He sees that woman's faith, and we need to make sure we show that kind of compassion to people. So again, I appreciate everyone who watches these videos and goes through them. It's we're going to see as we follow through this, Jesus heal many people. And I really appreciate everyone who continues to follow along with this study. If I feel free to comment, feel free to ask questions. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, please go ahead and do so. We're going to continue to put these out. We're over 100 and some days into this study. And so again, if you want to follow along and be notified when we publish new videos, the best way to do that is to subscribe. As always, I appreciate everyone for watching.